A church stands in silence. Candles flicker, incense rises, and the faithful bow their heads. But under the marble floor, beneath the altar, the ground itself remembers. Once, it was not the voice of a priest that echoed here, but the cry of animals led to slaughter, the chanting of men who worshipped fire, sun, or blood. Across Europe, Africa, and the Near East, the triumph of Christianity was not built on empty fields. It was built on the graves of older gods. Where temples of Jupiter or Apollo once reached toward the sky, basilicas now rise. Where druids raised wooden poles in groves drenched with sacrifice, monks carved stone crosses. And where Mithraic cults lit torches in their shadowy chambers, churches burned incense to Christ. Coincidence? Or strategy? Why did so many early Christian builders choose to raise their sanctuaries on the very ground where rival gods were once worshipped? Was it convenience, ready foundations, already sacred land, stones that could be reused? Or was it something more deliberate, a holy act of conquest, absorbing and overriding the power of the defeated gods? Because one thing becomes clear when you dig through history's layers: the church didn't always erase the sacred. Sometimes, it covered it. Sometimes, it built directly above it. And in doing so, it may have preserved things never meant to survive. Archaeologists have uncovered crypts beneath cathedrals that lead not to the tombs of saints, but to altars blackened with fire, stained with blood. Statues of horned figures lie buried beneath stone floors, smashed but not destroyed. Roman inscriptions to forgotten gods have been found beneath chapels, carved centuries before the first Mass was spoken. And there are stories, whispered but persistent, of strange occurrences in churches whose foundations rest on older shrines, unexplained voices, flickers of light, even shadows that seem to linger long after prayers end. The faithful enter a church believing it to be a place sanctified by God. But if the ground remembers something else, then what truly lives beneath the altar? Consider the Basilica of San Clemente in Rome. Step inside today, and you'll see a Catholic church, centuries old. But descend the stairs, and you find another church beneath it, older, darker, from the 4th century. Go deeper still, and the ground opens into a Mithraeum, a temple of the god Mithras, where initiates once gathered in secrecy, sacrificing bulls and feasting in torchlight. 3 layers of worship stacked on top of one another, like the strata of faith itself. Did the church truly destroy Mithras? Or did it seal him away beneath the floor, or take Notre Dame in Paris? Tourists marvel at its Gothic spires, but the Isle de la Cite was sacred long before Christ. Beneath its stones lie the remains of Gallo-Roman temples, shrines to gods whose names have faded, but whose presence still lingers. When the fire consumed Notre Dame in 2019, some whispered it was not just an accident of construction, but the old gods stirring beneath, reclaiming their ground. Even in England, churches often rose on sites that once belonged to druids. Sacred groves were cut, and chapels placed where ritual fires once burned. Was this coincidence, or conquest? To Christians, it was victory over demons. To the old ways, it may have been desecration. But either way, the memory of sacrifice never left the soil. So here is the question: when we walk into a church today, do we enter a place of Christ, or a place where gods have fought for dominance for centuries? The stones themselves cannot forget. The blood spilled upon them lingers. And if belief shapes reality, then perhaps the old gods were never erased at all, only forced into silence, waiting beneath layers of marble and scripture, listening for the moment someone remembers their name. the church bells ring. The choir sings. But beneath the altar, in the cold silence of the earth, shadows still move. The traveler kneels in the hushed glow of a candlelit chapel. The polished marble floor gleams underfoot, the air thick with incense and the soft whisper of prayers. Yet beneath that marble, archaeologists whisper, lies something far older, something the church would rather you never ask about. For centuries, Christianity has raised its monuments high above older ruins, not by accident, but by design. And nowhere is this more unsettling than in the stories of sacrifice sites swallowed whole by the cross. Imagine this: you stand in Rome, in the shadow of the Lateran Basilica, the very seat of the Bishop of Rome himself. It is a place considered holy beyond measure, the mother of all churches. But peel back the layers of stone and time, and you don't find Christ at first. You find Mithras, the bull slayer. The ground beneath once echoed with the chants of Roman soldiers, their swords lifted in devotion to a god who demanded the blood of beasts as tribute. Beneath the very foundations of Christianity's spiritual throne still rest fragments of altars where animals were slaughtered, their blood spilled into carved channels that fed the earth like a ritual offering. Why here? Why build Christ's throne over Mithras' altar? Was it conquest? Or was it assimilation, an effort to bury the gods, yet secretly harness their power? The pattern repeats across Europe. In Gaul, in the windswept plains where Druids once called down omens from oak groves, Christians planted their stone churches. The altar replaced the grove, the cross replaced the standing stone, but the air never fully cleared. Pilgrims still spoke of visions, of restless whispers in the walls, of shadows that never fit the light, and in Jerusalem, the very heart of the faith, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre itself is said to rest above what may have been a sacred quarry, where sacrifices were offered long before the story of Jesus was written. Rock cut by hands older than Christ cradles the shrine where millions kneel. Some claim the soil there remembers, that it drinks deeply from blood older than the gospel, that the shadow of sacrifice lingers like a ghost no incense can banish. These are not just ruins, not just old stones swallowed by new faith. They are wounds in the earth, covered but never healed. And the choice to build above them is no accident. The Church Fathers knew the ground was charged, heavy with centuries of devotion, fear, and blood. To conquer it, they had to sanctify it. But what if sanctification never erased what came before? Here lies the haunting question. Are worshippers today, kneeling in reverence to Christ, unknowingly kneeling upon the altars of older gods? Do the walls of their churches echo not only with hymns, but with muffled cries of offerings buried beneath? And if so, what power still lingers in those stones? Is it holy? Or is it something far more ancient, something that refused to die, something Christianity tried to chain but never destroyed? The story of churches built upon sacrifice sites is not just about history. It is about memory, shadow, and the uneasy truth that faith does not erase what came before. It only covers it, like marble over blood-soaked soil. So when you step into a cathedral and feel a chill that no candlelight warms, ask yourself, is it God you feel? Or the whisper of an older God, buried but never gone? Beneath the heart of Paris rises Notre Dame, the cathedral of spires and stained glass, the jewel of medieval Christendom. Tourists flock there to marvel at its soaring Gothic arches, its bells, its carved saints glaring down from the stone. But peel away the centuries of piety and art, and a stranger, darker Paris stirs beneath those stones. For Notre Dame did not rise from nothing. It rose upon bones, long before Paris became Paris, long before Rome's legions marched across Gaul. The Celtic tribes of the Parisii ruled the riverbanks. Their world was woven with sacrifice, their gods demanding offerings in blood and fire. Ancient texts, written by outsiders who feared them, describe Druids plunging victims into sacred groves and rivers, their bodies given to gods older than memory. Archaeologists digging beneath the city's layers have found proof: pits of animal remains, shattered idols, and bones blackened by fire. Some whisper that not all belong to beasts, that it is here, where offerings once smoldered, that Notre Dame's altar now stands. The transition was not accidental. When Christianity came to Gaul, it did not simply erase the gods of the Celts. It smothered them. Priests raised the cross directly above the sacred sites, as if to cage the spirits below. The cathedral itself, they say, was built where the Druids held their rites, near an island where sacrifices bled into the Seine. Think of this the next time you see Notre Dame bathed in daylight, its towers rising like prayers carved in stone. Beneath that brilliance lies a contested ground, one altar layered upon another. Worshippers kneel at the cross, but their knees press against stone where pagan fire once burned. The earth remembers what was offered there, even if the church tells another story, but memory does not always rest. In the Middle Ages, legends began to coil around Notre Dame like smoke. Locals spoke of shadows crossing the nave at night when no candle was lit, of voices echoing through the choir that were neither priest nor pilgrim. Some whispered that the gargoyles themselves, the grotesque stone beasts crouched along the walls, were not mere decoration, but guardians placed to keep something in. Not to ward off evil from entering, but to trap it from leaving. Was this architecture, or exorcism? Consider this: why build the greatest cathedral of France here, on ground already thick with centuries of blood? Was it holy conquest, an attempt to overwrite what came before? Or was it something more pragmatic, an acknowledgement that the ground was powerful, dangerous even, and must be harnessed rather than abandoned? The truth is unsettling. Christianity did not always erase the old gods. Sometimes, it borrowed their strength. The sacred geography of sacrifice became the sacred geography of the Massachusetts. The altar of Christ was raised directly where Druids once offered lives to appease their gods. And if one believes that places hold memory, then Notre Dame does not just belong to Christ. It belongs to both. Imagine kneeling there, candlelight flickering on ancient stone. The prayers you whisper float upward toward heaven. But what of the prayers that seep downward, into the cracks, into the soil, into the bones that lie hidden and unacknowledged? Do they vanish? Or do they awaken something older, listening from below? It raises a question the Church never intended us to ask. When you worship at Notre Dame, are you kneeling to Christ, or are you also, unknowingly, bending before gods who refuse to leave? The city celebrates its cathedral as a triumph of faith. But faith here is not pure. It is layered, like the city itself, stone upon stone, altar upon altar, blood upon blood. And if the walls of Notre Dame could speak, they might not tell you only of saints and angels. They might whisper of Druids, of bones blackened in fire, of the gods that were forced underground but never truly banished. The cathedral is not just a monument to Christianity. It is a prison, a mask, and a wound. And the shadows of Paris know it. In the center of Rome, sunlight falls through a perfect circle cut in the dome of an ancient building. The Pantheon. To most who enter today, it is a church, a place where statues of saints stand guard, where hymns echo upward to the sky framed by that open oculus. But before Rome was Christian, before Mary's name was whispered here, this temple was something else. Something far older and far stranger. The Pantheon was not a house for one god. It was a house for all. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Diana, Saturn, gods of war, love, fertility, and harvest, all gathered under one roof, one vast dome that symbolized the heavens themselves. The Romans called it the Pantheon, the temple of every god that demanded sacrifice. Imagine the incense thick in the air, priests in red and white robes pouring libations, blood dripping into bowls while the smoke of burnt offerings curled toward the sky through that open circle. When Christianity conquered Rome, the question of the Pantheon loomed. What do you do with a temple that once fed every god at once? Tear it down? Or take it? The decision was cunning. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface IV consecrated the Pantheon to the Virgin Mary and all Christian martyrs. He declared it no longer the house of pagan gods, but of Christian saints. But was it truly cleansed? Consider this: the Pantheon was not simply a temple. It was designed as a cosmic engine. The sun passes through its oculus in precise patterns, illuminating specific niches on holy days. Pagan architects built it not just as a monument, but as a living calendar, a ritual clockwork that bound the earth, the heavens, and the underworld together. These alignments still occur. And the Church, despite its rejection of pagan rites, left them untouched. Why? Some say it was convenience. Others suspect it was fear. The architects of faith knew that erasing such a place was impossible. Better to baptize it, to coat it with holy water, to change its name, than to risk what might rise if the structure were abandoned. But the old gods, the ones who received offerings here for centuries, are not easily silenced. Legends tell of strange sounds after dark within the Pantheon, whispers rising from the dome as if the gods themselves still argue in the shadows. Visitors describe sudden chills beneath the oculus, as though something unseen drifts downward, searching for the smoke of sacrifices that no longer burn. And then there are the bones. When the Church took over, it filled the Pantheon with the relics of martyrs, carted from the catacombs and entombed beneath its marble floor. Think about that, layer upon layer, saints on top of gods, martyrs pressed into the same soil that once drank the blood of bulls and men in Jupiter's honor. A graveyard of belief systems, piled into one circle of stone. Do the saints sleep peacefully here? Or do they dream uneasily, surrounded by powers they were told were false, yet that linger still in the geometry of the dome? The Pantheon today is celebrated as an architectural wonder, a triumph of both Roman engineering and Christian reclamation. But there is another way to see it. The Church did not conquer this temple. It merely became its tenant. The oculus still stares into the sky, the alignments still whisper of celestial rhythms, and the stones themselves still remember the prayers and cries offered long before Christ. Step inside on a quiet evening, when the tourists have gone. Stand in the circle of light beneath the oculus. The air feels heavy. The silence seems too loud. In that moment, you must ask yourself, whose temple are you truly standing in? The saints? The virgins? Or all the gods who came before, still watching, still waiting, still claiming this space as their own? The Pantheon is a riddle carved in stone. Christianity painted over its walls, but could never erase its purpose. The dome still belongs to the sky, the earth still hums beneath the marble, and the temple remains what it has always been, a house of gods. Perhaps not abandoned, only patient, and if places remember, then the pantheon remembers everything. Every offering, every prayer, every sacrifice. And no amount of holy water can wash it clean. Across the mist-shrouded fields of Britain, ancient stones rise from the earth like broken teeth. Weathered, silent, immovable. To the casual eye they are ruins, relics of a forgotten people, scattered across green hillsides where sheep graze and fog rolls low. But to the Druids, these circles of stone were not ruins. They were living temples, built to mark the movements of the stars, to channel the earth's power, to serve as gates between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The Romans could not destroy them. They tried. They scattered the Druids, cut down their sacred groves, outlawed their rites of blood and fire. But the stones remained, immune to conquest. Even centuries later, when Christianity began spreading through Britain, the problem of the stones lingered. These circles, these groves, these silent fields, people still feared them, still whispered about them, still left offerings in the dark. The church saw danger in that. And so, just as it had done in Rome, it turned to its most reliable strategy, assimilation. If you cannot erase a holy place, you bury it. One by one, Christian churches rose directly upon the sites of pagan worship. In Avebury, a massive stone circle once stood, larger even than Stonehenge. But the Christians did not leave it untouched. They built a village right into it. The church stood in the very heart of the circle, its steeple piercing the sky where once Druids read the movements of the sun. In Glastonbury, a site whispered to be a Druidic center of initiation, monks claimed it for Christ, declaring the ruins belonged to Joseph of Arimathea and the Holy Grail. In countless villages, wells sacred to Celtic goddesses became St. Mary's wells, their waters renamed holy but never stopped flowing. But ask yourself, when you build a cross atop a stone circle, does the cross truly claim it? Or do the stones, ancient and patient, swallow the cross instead? The people of Britain never fully stopped fearing these places. Even centuries later, locals avoided them at night. They whispered of lights dancing above the stones, of voices carried on the wind. Graves dug too close to the circles were said to sink, as if the earth itself rejected Christian burials. Farmers claimed their cattle would not graze near the stones, no matter how green the grass, and the groves that once drank the blood of sacrifices were never entirely forgotten. Monks recorded with horror that villagers still crept into the woods on midsummer nights, leaving bread, milk, or even small animals as offerings to powers older than Christ. The church called it heresy. The villagers called it tradition. Think of it, a priest in black robes raising the chalice, while only a few steps beneath the stone floor, the roots of ancient oak still twist in soil once darkened with blood. Above, the hymns of Christ; below, the silence of gods whose names no one dares to speak aloud, but sometimes silence is louder than prayer. At Avebury, local legends speak of stones that move. Not in the way of earthquakes or storms, but as if alive, shifting ever so slightly under the cover of night. Travelers claim they have seen them breathe, their surfaces rising and falling like the chest of something asleep. At Glastonbury, pilgrims tell of shadows moving against the ruins after dusk, too tall and too slow to be human. And everywhere the circles remain, the air feels heavier, charged, as though waiting for a ritual that has not yet ended. The church thought it had buried the gods of Britain. But burial is not the same as death. In truth, the stones endure. They hold memory. They hold hunger. And every church that rests upon them is not a place of victory, but a place of tension, an uneasy marriage of faiths, one sitting upon the other like a mask over a skull. The Druids are gone, but the stones remain. The gods they served are nameless now, yet not powerless. And when you kneel in one of these country chapels, whispering prayers to the saints, ask yourself, who else is listening? Who waits beneath the floor, behind the altar, beyond the stone walls where no light dares enter? Perhaps the church claimed these sites not to honor Christ, but to contain something it feared, and perhaps, just perhaps, the containment has never been perfect. In the heart of Eastern Europe, where birch forests stretch like pale skeletons against the horizon and rivers coil through the land like veins of silver, the old gods once ruled with fire and storm. Pagan, the thunderer, was king, his bolts split the sky, his sacred oaks marked the boundaries of worship. Veles, his rival, lurked in the underworld, lord of cattle, magic, and death. Between them lay an eternal struggle, sky against soil, storm against serpent. For centuries, villages gathered at wooden idols carved in their likeness, towering poles adorned with faces, rings, and runes. Cattle were sacrificed to Veles, warriors prayed to Pagan for victory, and women left offerings at springs for Mokosh, the goddess of fertility and fate. Fire blazed, blood spilled, chants carried into the woods. The Slavic gods were not distant, they were present, immediate, terrifying, and then came the cross. When Christianity arrived in these lands, it faced not only the stubbornness of tradition, but a pantheon that clung to its people with primal force. The missionaries soon learned what Rome had long known: you cannot simply forbid a god. You must bury it. So they built in Kiev, the grand cathedral of Saint Sophia Rose where once idols of Pagan had stood. The church bells rang over soil still damp from burnt offerings, as though trying to drown out the thunder god's voice. In Novgorod, a church was raised upon a sacred hill where sacrifices had long been made to Volos, another name for Veles. The villagers whispered that the ground itself resisted the foundation stones, that workmen fell ill, that tools broke, that storms rolled in without warning. But the church rose anyway, its spire stabbing the sky where once only oaks reached upward. Elsewhere, the missionaries toppled idols and buried them beneath church floors, believing Christ's presence would smother their influence. Wooden statues of Pagan were burned or sunk in rivers. Yet fragments remained. In Poland and Belarus, beneath small village chapels, archaeologists have found hidden pits, layers of ash, animal bones, and scorched soil. Traces of ritual fires, sealed but never erased, but the Slavic gods did not leave quietly. Legend spread of thunder-striking churches built too close to former groves, as if Pagan himself rejected the intrusion. Priests reported livestock dying mysteriously, their carcasses found with eyes wide and tongues blackened. Wells once dedicated to Mokosh turned sour, their waters no longer safe to drink. Villagers muttered that the gods were angry, that the cross was not stronger, only heavier. Even today, in the deep countryside, echoes linger. Some chapels still hold carvings of faces in their beams, grotesque and inhuman, said to be remnants of idols hidden in plain sight. In others, beneath the altar, the floorboards creak hollow, as if concealing pits where offerings once burned. Priests deny it, but locals whisper, the old gods were never destroyed. They were forced underground, and there they wait. Consider this. in Novgorod, when archaeologists unearthed the site of a demolished pagan temple, they found layers of Christian artifacts resting above pagan ones, crosses above animal bones, prayer beads above sacrificial ash. Layer upon layer, faith stacked upon faith, each refusing to vanish. A church atop a temple, a hymn atop a chant, a prayer atop a scream, but layers are not separation. They are entanglement, and so, in the forests of the East, Christianity became less of a victor and more of a mask. Villagers prayed to saints whose powers bore an uncanny resemblance to their old gods. Elijah became Purim, striking lightning from the sky. Saint Nicholas took on the traits of Veles, protector of cattle and wealth. The Virgin Mary wore the shadows of Mokosh, guarding fertility and weaving the threads of fate. That it was not replacement, it was disguise, yet the disguise slips. In some villages, people still leave offerings at springs and rivers. They light candles at oaks. They tell stories of thunder that punishes oath breakers, of serpents coiled beneath the earth, of faces seen in the wood of old churches when lightning flashes through stained glass. Perhaps the missionaries thought they had buried the Slavic gods beneath stone and scripture. But burial, once again, is not death. The altar may rise above the soil, but the roots still twist below, and when the storm breaks over Eastern Europe, when lightning splits the sky, when cattle shiver in their stalls, when waters turn dark, who do you think the villagers are truly praying to? The saints above? Or the gods beneath? The answer may be the same. Across the fjords and forests of Scandinavia, death was never silent. The Norse believed the dead walked beside the living, shadows that lingered, ancestors that demanded offerings, warriors carried into Valhalla by Odin's Valkyries, or dragged into the cold halls of hell by darker hands. Burial was not a ritual of closure, it was a transaction. Ships were dragged into the earth, filled with food, weapons, and slaves to accompany their masters into eternity. Fires raged across pyres that lit the sky, sending souls through smoke toward the gods. At Uppsala, a temple unlike any in Christendom rose, where sacrifices, sometimes of animals, sometimes of men, were hung in groves of sacred trees, blood soaking the soil in exchange for fertility and victory. The Norse world was a living pact with death, and then came the cross. Christian missionaries arrived not with thunder, but with patience. They preached, they baptized, they threatened, but above all, they built. And they built not on empty land, but upon the bones of the old faith. In Denmark, where once Viking chieftains were entombed in mounds that rose like scars upon the earth, churches were planted directly atop them. The mound became foundation. The grave became altar. The dead, once fed by offerings, were smothered beneath stone. But whispers persisted that such foundations cursed the churches above them, that priests heard voices rising from beneath the floor during Mass, that livestock sickened around them, that lightning seemed drawn to their steeples like a god reclaiming what had been stolen. At Gamla Uppsala, the most sacred of sites, the missionaries struck hardest. The temple, where golden idols of Thor, Odin, and Freyr had towered over ritual sacrifices, was dismantled, its timbers broken, its treasures seized. Upon its soil, a great cathedral was raised. The blood-stained groves were cut down, replaced by churchyards. Yet the people whispered that on certain nights, screams could still be heard in the wind, as though the sacrifices had never ceased. Archaeologists later confirmed the unease. Beneath Christian churches in Norway and Sweden, they found remains of fire pits, animal bones, and post holes for wooden idols. Beneath some churchyards, traces of cremation pits lay hidden, ash woven into the soil of consecrated ground. The Christians had not erased the old faith, they had entombed it beneath their own, but burial is not absence. Even as crosses rose, the old gods lingered in disguise. Thor became Saint Olaf in the minds of peasants, striking with his axe where once Thor's hammer fell. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, fused with tales of pilgrims and prophets who walked the earth in disguise. Freya, goddess of fertility, slid into the shadows of the Virgin Mary. And yet, beneath this Christian mask, something older still moved. Consider the legends of church construction. In more than one Scandinavian tale, workers claimed the earth resisted their efforts when they tried to raise a church upon a mound. Foundations sank overnight. Walls collapsed. Tools broke in the hands of carpenters. And so bargains were made, a human life promised, sometimes fulfilled, to anchor the church to soil that refused its weight. These church sacrifices became folklore, yet the pattern is too precise to dismiss. Christianity itself required blood, even as it sought to deny the blood that had flowed before. And then there is the question of sound. Villagers whispered that in certain churches built atop graves, strange noises echoed after dark, drumming from beneath the floorboards, the clang of swords, the cries of long-dead warriors. Priests claimed it was the settling of wood, the shifting of stone. But others swore the old dead were restless, walled away yet not appeased. Some still believe this, even today. In parts of Norway and Iceland, ancient burial mounds lie beneath small parish churches. Tourists walk through quiet chapels, unaware that beneath their feet lie ships filled with bones, swords rusting beside skulls. Priests bless the space, but the ground remembers, and when storms roll in off the North Sea, when thunder shakes the heavens and lightning strikes the steeples, the people look upward, then downward, uneasy. Because they know what the missionaries once feared, that the Norse gods are not gone, only buried, and burial, as history has shown again and again, is not death. The churches stand upon their graves, but the graves are never silent. The British Isles are littered with graves, rolling mounds rising from the earth like the knuckles of giants buried beneath the soil. Long before Rome, before Christianity, before even the written word, these barrows were carved as doorways to other worlds. The Celts and their predecessors believed the dead did not leave, they lingered, crossing back through stone passages and earthen tunnels, speaking in whispers through the ground. Offerings of food, weapons, and jewelry were left to appease them. Fires burned at Samhain, not simply to mark the turning of seasons, but to ward off what might crawl from the mounds when the veil thinned. Druids tended groves, raised circles of stone, and spoke to the unseen, their power inseparable from the graves that marked the land. Then Christianity arrived. The missionaries did not look away from the mounds. They built upon them. Across England and Wales, early churches were deliberately planted on ancient barrows. The message was clear: the old ways were to be crushed beneath the cross. Yet the ground resisted. Stories from Wiltshire tell of builders attempting to erect chapels beside ancient mounds, only to find their walls collapsing, their foundations sinking. Only when the churches were raised directly on top of the barrows did the ground hold. The saints had to sit upon the dead, as though keeping them pinned in place. Consider Knowlton Church in Dorset, a ruin still standing today. Its crumbling tower rises directly from the center of a Neolithic earthwork circle once used for pagan rites. Pilgrims travel there even now, sensing something uncanny in the air. An unease in the way the church feels swallowed by the land rather than resting upon it. Locals whisper that, at dusk, hooded figures can be seen walking the circular earthworks, moving counter to the church's shadow. In other places, abbeys rose over sacred wells and springs once dedicated to Celtic deities. The wells were renamed for saints, the shrines baptized with holy water. Yet people still crept there in secret, leaving offerings in the dark, whispering prayers not to Christ, but to something older that still stirred beneath the stones. Archaeologists continue to find coins and ribbons at these wells, signs of worship that never ceased, and then there are the tales of hauntings. At Glastonbury, said to be the resting place of Avalon, monks claim to have found the grave of King Arthur himself. Yet the grave was not discovered until the abbey's finances were failing, leading many to suspect it was fabricated to lure pilgrims. But beneath the abbey ruins, traces of pre-Christian burials have been unearthed, bones intermingled with later Christian relics. Pilgrims walking there today often report a pressure in the air, as though the place is still contested, its true ownership unsettled. Other legends speak of churches where spectral figures were seen standing upon the altar, not in the form of saints, but horned and cloaked, their presence so terrifying that priests fled mid-sermon. In Cornwall, locals avoided certain chapels built atop barrows, swearing that lights glowed from beneath the floor at night. Will-o'-the-wisps, or perhaps the spirits of those disturbed beneath. The pattern repeats itself with unsettling precision. Barrows became chapels, groves became churchyards, sacred wells became holy fonts, yet the old rites persisted in shadows, sometimes absorbed, sometimes disguised. The festival of Samhain became All Hallows' Eve, but its fear of the dead remained intact. Beltane fires, once lit for fertility, burned as St. John's fires under new names. Even as priests declared victory, the people continued to slip between both worlds, and the barrows themselves. They endured. Walk the countryside today and you will find countless churches perched upon unnatural rises. Most passers-by assume these hills are natural, but archaeologists know better. They are graves. Entire congregations kneel and pray above ancient tombs, unaware that beneath them lie skeletons wrapped in soil, eyes once fixed on gods the church tried to erase, and perhaps that is the truest horror of all, for Christianity did not destroy the barrows. It locked them in place, layered one faith upon another like stacked coffins. And every so often, when mist creeps low across the fields, when bells toll across the countryside, when the night grows too quiet, you can almost hear the older bells ringing back, deep within the earth, calling out from the graves beneath the abbeys. The barrows are not silent. They never were. Along the North African coast, long before Rome claimed the seas, the people of Carthage honored their dead with fire. The Tophet of Carthage, a sprawling necropolis, was not merely a graveyard, it was an open altar to the gods Baal, Hammon and Tanit. Here, death was not hidden away. It was public. Rituals blazed beneath the sky, and urns of ash were set in the earth beneath stone markers carved with crescent moons and open hands, symbols of divine exchange. Classical writers whispered of darker rites, infants consigned to flames, their cries swallowed by the clash of drums. Whether these accounts were fact or Roman propaganda, one truth endures: fire was the doorway, and the Tophet was its threshold. When Rome finally ground Carthage into dust, they did not destroy the Tophet. They built upon it. Christian basilicas rose where the stele once stood, their foundations driven through layers of urns. The sacred flames were extinguished, but the ground still carried the memory of heat. Archaeologists uncovering the site centuries later found ash still black and potent, as though waiting. And yet the church called this place holy ground, draping its altars in incense while the soil itself still smelled of char. The suppression spread beyond Carthage. Across the Maghreb, Berber tribes built cairns and tombs for their dead, marking the desert with stone beacons that guided travelers and spirits alike. They left food and drink at these sites, believing the dead wandered with the living, thirsty for offerings. Early bishops condemned this practice as pagan corruption. Edicts thundered from councils in Hippo and Carthage itself, "Let no man light lamps or place bread at the tombs, for the spirits of the dead are not to be fed." But the people did not listen. By night, offerings still appeared. Loaves of bread vanished. Lamps burned without oil. In the margins of Christian sermons, we find priests raging at their flocks, frustrated that old rites clung tighter than Scripture. Even St. Augustine, the towering mind of North Africa, admitted with unease that the people still left food at graves despite his condemnation. The Church fought back with transformation. Pagan cairns were recast as the tombs of saints. Desert shrines were renamed and claimed as Christian martyria. In many places, the transition was so complete that worshippers no longer knew which bones they knelt before: Berber ancestors, Carthaginian priests, or Christian martyrs. The line blurred until the land itself felt haunted, its dead never given peace, only renamed. And yet, strange signs remained. In Tunisia, excavations beneath basilicas have revealed layers of burials that predate Christianity by centuries, their bones scorched as though by ritual fire. In Libya, desert shrines still hold stones carved with symbols of Tanit, weathered but unmistakable, standing in the shadows of ruined monasteries. Pilgrims still tie cloth to trees at these sites, an act no different from the offerings condemned by Augustine 1,600 years ago. And the legends have teeth. Stories from the Kabyle Mountains speak of ghost fires that rise from certain cairns at dusk, blue flames that dance without smoke. Locals say these are the remnants of Carthaginian sacrifices, flames that never went out, merely buried beneath centuries of denial. Shepherds avoid them, claiming those who follow the lights vanish into the desert and are never seen again. Others speak of basilicas where the earth trembles, as if something below strains against its burial. Priests once reported strange heat rising through the stone floors, strong enough to crack altar tiles. In one ruined church outside modern Tunis, archaeologists found melted brick fused into the soil beneath, a silent reminder of the flames that once consumed the Tophet. Christianity did not erase Carthage. It suffocated it, but the ground is restless. Every basilica that sits upon a Carthaginian fire pit, every chapel that crowns a Berber cairn, is a sealed chamber of unresolved death. The rituals were outlawed, the gods were renamed, the offerings forbidden. Yet the fire smolders still, and the silence feels heavier than any cry, and when the desert wind blows just right, some swear they hear it, a low hum, a chant without words, the rhythm of drums echoing from beneath the soil where basilicas now stand. The Carthaginian dead are not gone. They are waiting. In the endless forests and windswept plains of Eastern Europe, long before the Orthodox cross rose above wooden churches, the Slavic dead lay beneath the earth in kurgans, mounded tombs that swelled from the soil like frozen waves. Each mound was not only a grave but a beacon, a signal that the ancestor within still walked beside the living. The rites were raw, elemental. Warriors and chieftains were buried with their weapons, their horses, sometimes their wives or servants, who were strangled or burned to follow them. Fires burned at the base of the mound. Mead was poured into the earth as if the soil itself could drink. At night, villagers returned to the sites with bread, cheese, and ale, whispering names into the grass. The ancestors were not gone, they lingered, powerful, watching. When Byzantine missionaries pushed north in the 9th and 10th centuries, they were horrified. To them, these mounds were proof of devil worship, of souls trapped in the dirt by blood offerings. Churches were built in their shadow, crosses driven into their summits like nails into a coffin. Yet the mounds resisted, priests thundered from pulpits, "No Christian shall pour ale at the graves. No man shall invoke his ancestors with bread or song." But the people disobeyed. In secret, they crept back, pressing loaves into the grass and whispering into the soil. The earth always accepted, desperation grew. Edicts turned violent. Kurgans were torn open, bones scattered, idols smashed. Some were set on fire, others leveled by order of the Tsar, their dirt carried away to prevent any trace of return. Yet even stripped bare, the places still drew offerings. Travelers left coins or cloth, fearful that ignoring the mound would invite illness, famine, or worse, and then, the hauntings began. Monks recorded strange fires flickering over abandoned kurgans, ghostly lights that drifted from the soil at night. Locals called them ogniki, wandering flames said to be the souls of those who had been denied proper rites. Farmers swore that fields plowed too close to a mound grew nothing but blackened stalks. Villages abandoned churches built atop such sites, claiming the earth beneath rumbled like something restless was turning in its sleep. One chronicle tells of a wooden church in Novgorod, built directly upon a raised mound. During its consecration, the floorboards shook so violently that chalices toppled and split. The priests ordered the mound dug deeper. What they found, according to the record, was a hollow space filled with ash, and within it, a charred skull that crumbled at their touch. The church collapsed within a decade. No one rebuilt, and the dreams, always the dreams, from the Carpathians to the Urals, stories persisted of villagers dreaming of ancestors who rose from the mounds to demand offerings. These figures came not as pale ghosts but as flesh and bone, dressed in burial clothes, carrying weapons that glowed with fire. To refuse them, it was said, brought plagues or stillbirths. Some families, even into the 15th century, still buried food with their dead, just in case, slipping bread into coffins beneath the noses of priests, but the most unsettling legends concern the unquiet dead. In Slavic belief, those denied proper burial rites could not stay down. They rose again, not as shadows, but as yupari, the earliest form of what would later become the vampire. These were the dead dug from their mounds, stripped of ritual, cast into the cold earth without offerings. They were said to wander villages, hungry, desperate for what was once theirs, blood, bread, warmth. The church sought to claim even this. Priests reframed the restless dead as demons, using exorcisms and holy water to mask what had once been simple ancestral fury. Yet the people still told a different story, that the mounds themselves were alive, and that no amount of crosses or sermons could quiet the voices beneath. Even today, in rural stretches of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, the mounds remain. Farmers avoid plowing through them. Travelers leave coins, even if they claim not to believe. And some of these mounds, those cut open by priests, those desecrated in the name of God, are said to hum with a sound too low for the ear, a vibration felt in the bones. It is as if the earth remembers every offering denied, every grave robbed, every ancestor silenced. The mounds are not empty, they are waiting. When European ships cut across the Atlantic, they did not just bring soldiers and settlers. They carried priests, missionaries, and the conviction that the dead must rest in ways sanctioned by the cross. But in the vastness of the Americas, they found peoples whose burial rites stretched back millennia, rituals woven into the land itself, into rivers, mountains, and stars. The missionaries wrote of it with disgust. They saw pagan graves, but they misunderstood what they were looking at. Among the Mississippian cultures, earthworks rose like mountains built by human hands. The dead were placed within them, layered with shells, effigies, and pipes carved in stone. The mounds were not graves alone, they were living calendars, aligned with the solstice sun, the moon's path, and the stars above. To destroy a mound was to sever a people from both their ancestors and the cosmos. In the Southwest, Pueblo peoples buried their dead beneath the very floors of their homes. To live above the bones of family was not morbid but protective, an unbroken bond between the living and the departed. The Spanish called it witchcraft. They ordered the bodies removed, reburying them in churchyards so that souls might not wander. But the homes grew silent afterward, as if the walls no longer remembered the voices of those who had built them. Farther north, in the Great Plains, the Lakota laid their dead on scaffolds, open to the sky. Wind, birds, and time thinned the flesh until only bone remained. To outsiders, it was barbaric. But to the Lakota, it was a gift, the body offered back to the sky, the soul carried by wind to the spirit world. Missionaries burned the scaffolds, cutting them down with axes. Still, whispers spread of ghostly riders appearing at night where the poles once stood, the sound of hoofbeats thundering across grass no horse had touched. The missionaries' fury grew sharper in Mesoamerica. Here they found pyramids that doubled as tombs, bones wrapped in textiles and placed with obsidian, maize, and jade. In Maya villages, families buried their dead beneath courtyards, believing that ancestors continued to guard the living. The Spanish demanded reburial in consecrated ground, declaring the practice idolatry. Entire cemeteries were built over raised plazas. Yet still, people left food and candles at the foundations of churches, as if they knew who truly lay beneath. What frightened the missionaries most was that these burials did not separate life from death. In indigenous cosmologies, the dead remained active, guiding harvests, sending dreams, punishing those who broke taboos. To priests, this was proof of diabolical influence. To the people, it was proof that the dead had never left. One Franciscan friar in 1620 wrote of a village in New Spain where children claimed to see figures of their grandfathers sitting at night by the fires. The friar ordered the ground beneath the homes dug up. What they found were bundles of bones wrapped in woven mats, placed carefully, as if still sleeping. The friar called it blasphemy. The villagers called it family, but erasure left wounds. In California, missions forced native peoples into European-style graveyards, lined with wooden crosses. The names of the buried were replaced with baptismal records, their rites forbidden. Yet elders whispered the old songs at night, humming low so the priests would not hear. In some places, the earth itself resisted. Graves dug atop ancient cemeteries collapsed, wooden crosses sinking into the soil as if the ground rejected them, and the hauntings followed. Travelers wrote of hearing drums beneath the earth near demolished mounds. Soldiers stationed at missions swore they saw faces in the dirt, emerging only when the moon was high. Priests reported sicknesses sweeping through villages that had abandoned traditional rites, as if the ancestors had withdrawn their protection. Even now, the traces remain. The great mounds still rise in Ohio and Mississippi, though many were leveled. Pueblo homes still whisper of bones beneath their stone floors. In parts of Mexico, families still bury offerings beneath their houses, unmarked, unseen, but persistent. The church thought it could silence the dead by burying them again, in consecrated soil, under crosses and records. But across the Americas, the old graves never closed. They breathe beneath missions, beneath plowed fields, beneath the asphalt of modern towns. The ancestors are still there, patient, unforgotten, and in the quiet hours, when the wind moves through the grass or the drums of a festival echo into the night, some swear they can feel the ground stir, reminding us that no law, no conquest, no church decree can keep the dead from rising in memory. The soil remembers. It always does. They stand there today, those churches. Quiet. Revered. Symbols of faith and redemption. Pilgrims enter them with prayers on their lips, candles in their hands, and hope in their hearts. But beneath the polished marble, under the carved crosses and stained glass, lie stones that once drank blood. Stones that once echoed with chants not to Christ, but to gods long forgotten by name, gods who demanded sacrifice. Think of it. When you kneel at the altar of a cathedral, do you know what soil your knees are pressing against? When you light a candle to honor a saint, could you be standing over the blackened pits of fire where animals, or perhaps humans, were once offered to older, darker powers? History has a way of layering itself. Christianity did not erase the world that came before, it built on top of it. Literally. Pagan temples became churches. Shrines to gods of war, fertility, and death were transformed into sanctuaries of Christ. But what if the transformation wasn't complete? What if the echo of the old rites, the energy of the sacrifices, the very spiritual charge of those grounds, still lingers? Archaeologists whisper of bones found where they should not be. Of inscriptions buried in church foundations, half scrubbed away but not forgotten. Of saints' relics that sit where idols once stood, as if one holy presence was meant to override another. But can the past truly be overridden, or does it always bleed through, like a ghost that refuses to rest? Ask yourself, why did the early church choose those specific places? Was it strategy, meant to conquer and replace the sacred spaces of their rivals? Or was it fear, an attempt to cage the power of the old gods by building churches directly above them, sealing their memory under crosses and hymns? Legends across Europe and the Near East tell of churches where strange things still happen, shadows moving where no light should be, voices murmuring during Mass, altars that drip with water or blood though no source can be found. The faithful call them miracles. Skeptics call them superstition. But those who dig into the foundations, the archaeologists, the historians, the seekers, sometimes find something far more unsettling, proof that beneath the floorboards of Christendom still lies the flesh of an older world. So the question lingers, when you stand inside these sacred spaces today, whose presence are you really feeling? The God of salvation? Or the ancient gods who once demanded offerings on that very ground? And perhaps the most chilling thought of all, did Christianity conquer the old gods, or did it inherit them? The churches remain, timeless and unyielding. But listen closely, listen when the choir falls silent, when the night settles in, when the candles flicker and the shadows stretch across the pews. The stones beneath your feet are older than the sermons above your head. They have heard the cries of sacrifice, the wails of supplication, the silence of death, and some say they are still listening.